I was thinking of doing some kind of a riff on the St. Michael prayer, the chant, or trying to find the chords in that.
St. Michael, the Archangel, defend us. Hello and welcome to Mic'd, the official and new podcast of St. Michael Catholic Church, Gastonia, North Carolina. My name is Shane, the Director of Evangelization here at this parish, and I'm with Father Rossi, the pastor of St. Michael. Hello, Father. How are you?
Doing well, Shane. Very excited for Holy Week.
Yes, I figured since you had such a free schedule this week, we would do the podcast right in the middle of Holy Week. That's kind of a joke.
Yes, this is the 11th hour.
Yeah, but how are things going, and what have you been up to since the last time we met?
Things are going well. Yesterday, we were with the bishop for what's known as the Chrism Mass, and this is a Mass that I think a lot of faithful may not even know about. It's always, in the Diocese of Charlotte, it's been Tuesday mornings of Holy Week, and it's a very important Mass where the bishop gathers with the priests of the diocese, and we're there to renew our priestly vows, or priestly promises, rather. The bishop asks for that, and then he renews his promise to shepherd the church, and he asks the faithful for prayers for the priests and for himself. And it's called the Chrism Mass because ultimately that's the Mass where he consecrates chrism and blesses the holy oils of the oil of catechumens and the oil for the sick, the oil of the infirm. And so every year this happens. It's sort of like, so our last year holy oil stock is dispensed properly at the end of this year, which is this week, and then we receive the new oils at this Mass. So the bishop blesses all this oil that's for all the parishes. So you have to get your holy oils from the cathedral after this Mass. So everyone has to bring we have little containers that we use. Every parish has different things, but it's beautiful. The oil of the sick is blessed in the middle of the Eucharistic prayers. So after the consecration of the bread and wine, there's a special prayer. The bishop, puts his hands up and blesses the oil for the sick. So that's within the Mass there. And then at the end of Mass, he does a special, I guess it's a consecration for the chrism, because he actually breathes over these big glass containers of oil, and he breathes over them. And says a very special prayer, and the priests that are there also put our right hand out without saying anything to join him in this prayer. And the chrism is the important oil because it's the oil that everybody is chrismated, as you say, at baptism. So you get that on the crown of your head, and then for the priest, his hands are anointed with this oil at his ordination. The chrism altars are smeared with this oil when they're consecrated, if there's a new church or a new church altar. And the walls of the church are also traced with the sign of the cross with chrism. And then the other sacrament is, of course, confirmation. The bishop will make the sign of the cross with chrism on your forehead. So the chrism is an essential oil, I guess.
Essential oils.
Essential oil.
We believed in them before they were popular.
That's right. So yesterday was the Mass of the essential oils, because these three, and the catechumen oil is used, of course, to anoint a person right before baptism. Usually babies receive that, the anointing for catechumens. It just marks.
And that will happen this Saturday. So the catechumens, you have oil for them that was blessed by the bishop.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So that was a beautiful Mass yesterday. Lots of priests, and it's a great day. Yeah,
it was a great week for me. I want to thanks to all the people at St. Michael and for Father Rossi. I returned at the end of last week from a parish missions that I led for 3 days in Texas.
Did you go?
I went to Texas to St. Teresa Catholic Church in Sugar Land, Texas. A friend of mine invited me to come speak for 3 nights, and I spoke about my confirmation saint, Therese of Lisieux, who's right here. And by the way, we're in what's called the Little Flower War Room, which you came up with. But I love Therese, a big part of my conversion, and I had just had a blast there. And so thanks to all of the folks here for supporting that. And for anybody who might be listening at St. Therese, thank you for listening to me for 3 nights.
What were you able to speak about?
Well, I spoke on my first night, I spoke on my conversion. Most people have heard that story. The second night I spoke about the mystical life of St. Therese herself. What were the foundational elements of her spirituality? And then the third night I presented an argument that I think Therese, by the end of her life, was so conformed to the Virgin Mary that you could say of Therese what G.K. Chesterton has said about St. Francis of Assisi to Jesus. Because Chesterton had said that Francis was so like Jesus that to have met Francis would have been almost like meeting Jesus. Mm-hmm. And I think that you could apply that to Therese. And I was able to maybe draw some parallels to her life that are extremely Marian in nature, even from a doctrinal standpoint. And it was received very well. And maybe I'll have a chance to share that, some other time.
Sure. Great. Yeah, we look forward to possibly letting you have the opportunity here at the parish, St. Michael here, maybe in the fall.
Yeah, so why War Room? Real quick, why do we call it the Little Flower War Room?
Well, because we spend time in here in prayer, making lots of decisions. We have a lot of meetings, and we need God's grace with us. And I think we really entrust ourselves to the Little Flower in here to help us just always be like little children, trust in God's plan, and don't be an obstacle to His grace, to whatever decisions and conversations we have in this conference room, that really we are here to do God's will.
Yeah, what I love about that and why you call it Little Flower War Room is one of the things I presented was Therese's understanding of heaven is so unlike ours. For her, it wasn't this place of repose. It was the expansion of a mission. It's almost like mission control is heaven. Yeah. So she would love this idea of heaven, right, because that's what she was going to do.
Control. Yep, that's a good analogy as well. It's this sort of mission control. Are we really staying faithful to the mission Christ has commissioned us to have here at the parish?
That's right.
So that really the war room is just, are we still on mission? Where is the Lord guiding us, and are we listening? And
before we go into the main topic that I want us to talk about today, you saw the latest film, Father Stu.
Oh, yes.
Can you give us a 30-second review?
It's a very powerful story. It's a true story about a priest, I think from Montana, who led a very sinful life and had a conversion experience and became baptized as a Catholic upon meeting a young woman that he fell in love with. There's a lot of profanity, so I'm just going to do this disclaimer that don't go looking for a pious movie with a lot of color, flowery language. So it's a very true grit movie. But it was a good story, but it's rated R, so don't take that very seriously, because there's a lot of profanity and a lot of anyway.
There it is, everyone.
Just, but I mean, I think that the story that they share, it was powerful. It's certainly not for children at all, and but for young adults and for priests and seminarians and people discerning their vocation, it's a powerful story. And also, I think that it deals. I was trying to figure out what the movie is really dealing with, but it seems like, in a sense, like Job. Job, of course, was innocent and did not sin against the Lord, but the movie deals a lot with human suffering and why does God allow suffering. This Stuart Long is the man who became a priest, his name, and his little family just very, very broken. I mean, immensely broken family in the movie, and just lots of brokenness that just plays throughout the whole movie. And the vulgarity is part of that brokenness, just this kind of street talk. But he was very unconventional in the way he spoke to people, even as a priest. That will shock people, I think. But there's also the sense that he was connecting with, there's a scene with him in the prison where he's speaking to the inmates, and there's a seminary. I think they're both seminarians, but one of them starts off in just this kind of very book knowledge, and you can see the inmates just totally shut down right away. And then Stu begins to speak a little colorfully to them, but seems to get the message of the gospel across. And so you can see that people connect with him for his candidness and candor in many ways. But I don't want to go into the whole storyline, because if you choose to see it, there's some very powerful moments in the end. Was very impactful as well at the very end of the movie. So proceed with caution.
All right. Well, thank you for that. What I want us to talk about today is it's an idea that came to me Sunday, which was Palm Sunday. Right now we are recording on Wednesday of Holy Week,
Yes.
Holy Wednesday. And most people have very little knowledge about what was really happening when Jesus came into Jerusalem on the donkey, because it was a moment that was fraught with symbolism, at least in the first century. And the readings here, the Passion reading is so long, it doesn't give you or any priest an opportunity to really delve into the history there. I was joking with a friend of mine, says, people say that the Catholics don't like the Bible. This is a stereotype, of course. I'm like, well, come to the masses during Holy Week.
Right.
We read an entire gospel all at once.
Yes, right.
But what I want us to talk about, and maybe the viewers would like to maybe understand this as well, like what was going on Palm Sunday. And I really want to break it down to really three symbols that we could just talk about. We could talk about more, but the palms being one, the Passover being another, and then the donkey on which Jesus rode and what those mean. So let's start with the palms. We started with the procession at the 9 o'clock Mass. We all had our palms. What was the symbolism of the palm or the palm branch in the first century?
I think, from my understanding, it was a symbol of praise, but also of victory, of welcome, a regal welcome of someone coming in, a king coming in from battle, saying, "Great job, you're victorious. The victor is returning," and we're indicating that with the palm branches. So that element's there. So it's a kingly victory. And a welcome and a praise that's occurring there. And
I would say, for the most part, it was not. It was also a military kingly.
Yes.
Victory.
Oh, yes.
I mean, that's usually what it was a symbol of, was a military victory. What I find fascinating is that the Maccabean revolt, and I cannot remember how many centuries before this moment it would have occurred, but when Judas Maccabeus led a revolt against the Syrians who had taken control of the temple. And when Antiochus Epiphanes placed his image, I believe it was, inside the temple, the Maccabeans led this revolt. They defeated the Syrians in that revolt, and they celebrated it by waving palm branches. And there are little coins you can see to this day during the Hasmonean dynasty, the Maccabean dynasty, where you will see an image of the king and palm branches around it. What's interesting about that is that there's no doubt that people would have been in the crowd. Like you said, it's a symbol of victory. Mm-hmm. It's a military victory. Mm-hmm. Jesus is headed, if you go to Israel, right towards the temple. The Mount of Olives just comes down this way, and the temple will be right in front of you. And there's no doubt that there would have been people within the crowd. He's headed towards the temple. The Maccabeans waved palm branches when they defeated the Syrians. Rome's in charge of the temple right now. There's no doubt that it would have been charged with a little tension.
Probably a lot of tension, I would say,
right.
With that context.
Or anticipation.
Yeah, with that context you're providing. I think what gets lost in our Catholic minds is the context. We hear the Pharisees, the Sanhedrin, and Rome, and we don't understand the impact that they were living under an oppressiveness of Roman rule.
They were occupied.
They were occupying your city that you once had control of when you had kings of Israel, which no longer sat on the throne, and you had Pilate and the Romans there to keep putting down all these rebellions that would sprout up because they're trying. You're trying to get your independence. You're tired of Roman rule, and then the issue with the Pharisees and other Jewish leaders where they were just trying to concede or just kind of be a little sly and work with Rome, and sort of get privileges, I suppose. And they were forsaking, I think in many ways their true responsibility, which is God's law, and so I think they got wrapped up in that politics. And I think then, of course, the Messiah begins to be seen as, is he going to be this political liberator? Is he going to come and free Israel? Yes, he is from their sins, he's not coming to free you from Roman rule and give you back your temple and drive out the Roman guard who are crucifying, anyone who remotely goes against their rule. And I think that's another thing. It's like crucifixion was a massively frightening, public, the worst kind of punishment that you could think of. And they were doing this publicly along the street, like basically, if you mess with us, this is what will happen to you.
And we know hundreds of thousands of people were crucified by the Roman regime, and we don't know who they are, which
Right.
we have to get into later. I think
Sure.
that's a good proof that Jesus was truly raised from the dead, because we remember who he is as a crucified man. Most of them were, I think the word is in our day, disappeared.
Yeah.
Crucifixion was meant to disappear you
Yeah.
from the face of the earth. And yes, I will go so far as to say, and I know you and I have talked about it, that crucifixion in the first century was equivalent to 19th and 20th century lynchings in the South.
Sure.
It was a public form of humiliation and death, as a way to demonstrate that if you buck our power, this is what's going to happen to you.
Just public murder,
It's public murder.
Yeah, and that and totally disgraceful, and meant to be that way publicly, and it's certainly a horrible scourge on our nation's history. But I think that the context for the Jesus' arrival in Jerusalem is that tension of, is he going to be the one to put down the Romans? Is this going to be the end of their rule? Are we finally going to be politically free to live, peacefully? And no.
Right. And you have to think, like Simon the Zealot. Now, the Zealots were a band of, well, really, the Romans would have called them brigands. They were insurrectionists. They believed in taking or defeating the enemy through the sword. You just have to think that perhaps, maybe I'm wrong, that Simon the Zealot, one of Jesus's 12, had to have some anticipation, like, what is this getting ready to be the Maccabean revolt again? And will Jesus defeat the Romans and cleanse them from the temple? You have to think that was a part of what's going on in this moment in the minds of some of the people.
Mm-hmm, definitely.
Now, okay, so that's the palm, symbol of military victory, which harkens back to, it's not exclusive to, but it harkens back to the Jews defeating the Syrians at the temple, which is observed at Hanukkah every year. Passover. This is another political, really, if you think about it, this is another political feast. Tell us about the Passover, what that meant in the Bible.
Well, I mean, this is one of the three main feasts that all the Jews were supposed to participate in. And so they come to Jerusalem, and if they can afford, to get their lamb to sacrifice, and that goes back to Exodus of the sacrifice the lamb, use the blood to put on your doorposts, and and to commemorate, to make a memorial of the Lord's deliverance of the angel of death that passed over Egypt and struck down all the firstborn. The Israelites were preserved and saved from that destruction by the blood of the lamb. And so they commemorate that with the Passover. They're supposed to eat the lamb, eat the flesh of the lamb.
Right.
So that's, of course, going on, and to eat it in such a way, and the book of Exodus lays out how that ritual is supposed to happen. But it was, I think they did this in Jerusalem, right? To travel there to have this.
We're at the temple.
Yeah.
And we think that the temple really primarily was a place of sacrifice. Yes, it was the meeting between heaven and earth, God among his people, but what happened at the temple were sacrifices. So the smell of blood would have been in the air. Also the smell of burning flesh, because some of the burnt offerings, they would cook the flesh on these fires. So it was that. But also from if you're just looking at it from we shouldn't say non-theological, but from one point of view, it was also the commemoration of the deliverance of the Jewish people from the tyrants, from the tyranny of Egypt,
right,
from the empire. And so, wow, now we can begin to understand why Pontius Pilate and the Roman police force came to Jerusalem during Passover week. Again, it would have been charged with tension because the Jews are commemorating the festival of their deliverance from the empire. Rome, the empire, is in charge. Now we've got Jesus coming in with palm branches waving. It begins to start to focus a little bit on why Jesus probably would have been put under surveillance in this moment. Yeah. My words, but I think that historically would be the reason why it would also create such a tense environment.
Well, Jesus was on surveillance, as you say, by then. By that point, he had raised Lazarus from the dead, and remember in John's Gospel that they had decided maybe they would kill Lazarus too, but they were set on killing Christ after that final tremendous miracle. So And, so the Pharisees are there and rebuking Jesus. And Luke's gospel will tell your disciples tell them to stop calling you basically the Messiah, because the children were quoting Psalm 18, Hosanna to the Son of David, Hosanna in the highest, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Those prophetic texts of the Psalm 118 being applied publicly to Christ at this point.
And it's the royal psalm, isn't it? Isn't that the psalm that was sung as the kings would come in to the city?
Possibly. I don't know
Hosanna in the
exactly.
highest, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. I know there's some. And there's a really important verse in Psalm 118. I'll try to remember it in a couple of minutes, that I think really drives what would have been going on in the mind of our Lord as he's coming in to Jerusalem. So it's really fascinating, the branches, now the Passover, the deliverance from the empire. Think about now the donkey from a biblical context. Do you know much about why would Jesus come on a donkey of all creatures?
Well, there's of course in the book of Zechariah, the prophecy. It is
Zechariah. It is.
Yeah. So,
sure.
I don't know the chapter.
Chapter 9, I believe it is, verse 9.
It's your king shall come to you riding on a donkey or an ass, whichever translation is used, or a colt, the foal of an ass. That there's this. It's a humbling arrival. That why would the king come on a donkey? Why isn't he riding in on some military or some war animal? That would be used in battle. But no, it's on this donkey, and a simple donkey, because the text says, in the gospel, which I think we had Luke this Sunday, past Palm Sunday, that Christ sat on the one upon which no one has ever sat.
Which is really remarkable, because I don't think I would ever get on an untamed donkey that's never had anybody. Really?
Yes. Well, I think it means too that it was just sort of a really young animal, that it just had become ready to possibly be sat upon. And then I think which another gospels show that there's a donkey, but then another, maybe it's the mother, it's a pair, so that the younger one is able to kind of do what it needs to do, because the mom is also there, leading the way. And so that I've seen that. But also Benedict XVI points this out in Jesus of Nazareth, the Holy Week volume of his work on Jesus of Nazareth, that Christ's kingship is also being expressed with his requisition of transportation, to say, go get someone else's animal for me to ride on. So he's requisitioning.
Right. It's good.
He's saying, he needs use of this. If this is,
and tell him
the
Lord needs it.
Yeah. Say, well, who's this? Who's asking? Well, basically, the king has need of it. Like the Messiah. This is a moment of transportation. You're asking to use someone else's animal, and then it's clear that he does return it. It does say, and I think he says, and then return it,
yes,
at the end. So it's not like it's not theft, So, but it is it points to the kingship.
And I think that's also important. So the question would arise: where did Zechariah get his vision for the king will come on a donkey? My thesis, and I think many other scholars have pointed this out as well, is that if you go back and read 1 Kings chapter 1, and I think it's verse 3, David is in his old age, is at the end of his life, and he summons either a donkey or a mule. Maybe they're synonymous, but there could be a difference. But a donkey or a mule, and he orders his people to place his son Solomon on it, to process Solomon through the streets of the cities, announcing that he will be the new king, the son of David. And I think that's where Zechariah got his prophecy. And now here we see Jesus coming in. Who is he going to be? The new David, the new son of David. So it's absolutely right that Jesus knew what he was doing.
Yes.
He is announcing himself as the king, but he will be a king no one expected.
Right.
So that brings me back to the Psalm 118. If you look in verse 27 of Psalm 118, it's a really profound verse. And I don't know if I'll get it exactly right, but it says, lead the procession with branches. Lead the procession with branches to the horns of the altar. lead the procession with branches to the horns of the altar. To the altar of what? Well, the altar of the temple, the altar of sacrifice. So although you would have had crowds of people with who knows what was going on in their imagination about what this means. He's on the donkey. This is the new son of Solomon. It's Passover, the defeat of the empire by God. Is he the Messiah? We have the branches that demonstrate military victory. Where did Jesus know he was going? Well, he was headed towards the temple, sure. But I think in his mind he knew that he was this festal procession was leading him to the altar of the sacrifice. Does that make sense?
Yes, and of course, I mean, our Lord's face could have been nothing but just very solemn.
Sure, or tears, or even in tears.
Well, isn't there? He weeps over Jerusalem.
He does a little bit later.
Well, you said Psalm 118. I was just thinking to look at the liturgy for Palm Sunday, and I do think one of the things that we're singing with as we processed in was chanting that maybe it was Psalm 118, but the refrain was the children of the Hebrews and we kept saying glory, laud, and honor to you, O Christ, King and Redeemer, to whom the lips of children made sweet hosannas ring. And I think maybe the verses of that may have been that Psalm 118 as an option. So who knows? Oh,
they were quoting it. Yeah. Certainly the Hosanna.
Yeah.
But everybody mistook what Jesus was about. And of course, in the first century, a donkey was an agricultural tool. Pontius Pilate, he would have processed in from the west. I always get my directions wrong. Yeah, Pontius Pilate would have come in from the west on a stallion. That's the war horse. Jesus comes from the east. And I think that's also important because the prophet Ezekiel talks about how the glory of the Lord has left the temple, but the glory of the Lord will return to the temple from the east. And so here comes the glory of the Lord. But nevertheless, he was writing an instrument of humility, of profound humility. And if you really take seriously Zechariah's prophecy, right after he says, your king's coming to you on the foal, he is coming to create peace. It's exactly what the next verse says. Not to launch
a military
war.
Campaign.
Yeah. So it's just really fascinating when you put it in that kind of historical context. Jesus knew exactly what he was doing in this moment, and he was already in many ways it was provocative.
Yes.
Can I say that? It would have been very provocative for the Roman authorities and for the Jewish authorities. Especially for the Jewish authorities.
And the use of the donkey, and then in that circumstance too, was to be very even almost overfulfill the prophecy. Like, I'm going to make it so obvious that I'm doing this to point to the prophecy of Zechariah.
Yeah, and so now we can maybe understand, okay, what was the worst thing that Jesus could have done? Because Pilate and the Romans, they would have been there to keep the peace. They would have been there to keep, the interest of national security.
Yeah,
that's what to prevent any riots from breaking out during this week of Passover. Well, what does Jesus do? I don't know which day it was. Was it Monday, Tuesday? Maybe when he overturned the tables in the temple. You do that. Of course, if you're on the Roman police side of things, or even the Jewish authorities, you're afraid that this is going to be the first domino to fall, where there's going to be an outbreak of rioting within Jerusalem.
That's a good place to put that in context, because we usually hear that gospel not during, I don't know if we hear it in a different cycle on Sunday during Lent, but I don't know that we do. But the Jesus turning over the tables and the driving out the money changers, the cleansing of the temple.
Oh, yes.
But I think they're paired. Is that what he did as he came into Jerusalem after Palm Sunday?
That's right.
So when we hear that, we need to also think, Jesus is doing this. He just came into the city. He's a few days away from his death, and he's absolutely making a scene again.
He made a scene.
And it's violent, So now they're really wondering, this guy is maybe inciting a riot.
Yeah, that's right. And I have said to other people, that would have put him on the most wanted list at that point. You do that during this week with the Roman forces there after the procession on Sunday. And I think it's in Mark's gospel. It's in one of the gospels where he does go immediately into the temple. In another gospel, I think maybe John's gospel, he goes toward the temple, but then heads back to Bethany to the home of Lazarus and Martha. But very provocative. It's just, I don't know. I just find that to be a fascinating, to put that in that kind of context.
I do
understand?
Too. Yeah, I haven't really thought of it pairing that up as you have just pointed out. That's very good.
Well, let's think about then, it's Holy Wednesday, tomorrow Holy Thursday. Now, this is another thing that I think most people need to put into context, and that is the washing of the feet. Because I was always taught that the foot washing was simply an expression of service. Yes, I do think, as some of the ancient church theologians understood, that you see a kind of recapitulation of the incarnation. He's emptying himself, he's coming down, he's descending to the floor for his disciples. But there's more to the foot washing than just a form of service. So can we talk a little bit about that?
Sure.
What do you, in seminary, for instance, how do you understand the foot washing? Because according to several priests I've understood, tomorrow night, Thursday night, is a day you really remember your priesthood, and I think that's
Correct.
important.
Yes. Well, we do that. We do, definitely. It's the institution of two things, the priesthood and the Holy Eucharist. That's really the two pillars that the liturgy of the Triduum begins to show and to unfold. And it really looks like a reenactment. I mean, the whole week is a dramatic reenactment of Jesus' final week, So the reenactment on Holy Thursday, one of them being the washing of the feet.
Right.
And so growing up with that, I just remember seeing, the priest wash, men's feet, at the Mass. And, then as I got a little older, I began to be aware of the debates that go on about, well, is it just men or shouldn't women be washed too? And that was going on, and we can get into that a little later. But ultimately, I think that it's so visibly a sign of service when the pastor is taking off his chasuble. The outer garment that the priest wears at Mass is the chasuble. He takes off the chasuble, sets it aside, and gets on the ground and begins to wash the feet of the chosen, usually men, 12 of them, and to wash them with water and dry them with a towel. And so as he's scooting along, and I've done this many times as a priest too, washing the feet, but not all the time have I done this. But it seems to be so provocative as people say, oh, it's a service. The Father is humbling himself, and he's getting on the ground, and it's moving and very impactful.
And it was the work of slaves in the first century.
And it's a strange. I mean, you don't do this in church and at Mass. You don't kneeling on the ground, scooting along the floor, washing bare feet. It's just very unique. But I think there's also, you and I were speaking before we started recording this about the consecration of the priesthood.
Yes, and that's what I want us to talk about. What Jesus is doing here, the foot washing, yes, it's a form of service, but he is instituting the priesthood of the new covenant. So talk a little bit about that.
Right. So I mean that goes to, I believe in Leviticus, as we were saying earlier, that Moses or Aaron washed his brothers to prepare them for to be made priests, the Levitical priesthood, and there was a whole ceremony to bring them into this service of worship, to temple worship as it was at the time, which was really, there wasn't a temple established. It was, you had to build it everywhere you went. It was a moving tent.
The tent of meeting.
Yeah, so it was, but it was to be set aside. The Levites were set aside for temple service, to be those who worship, to lead the worship of God, to help offer the sacrifices on behalf of the people, the Old Testament sacrifices, the animal sacrifices, the grain, the cereal offerings, doing all that. So there is a deeper connection to the foot washing to priesthood that I think that needs to be explained more.
I absolutely agree. I think it's in Leviticus 8 where Moses is doing several things, but one of the things he does is he washes Aaron and his sons, and it says to consecrate them into the priesthood. There were other things they was doing, but the washing was a part of it. What's also fascinating is if you get to Leviticus chapter 16, Aaron, before he goes in the tent of meeting, he's the high priest, Aaron. He takes off his garments. He washes himself, which we'll get back to, and washes his sons, and then he offers sacrifices. Jesus, if you read John, he takes off his garments, but he doesn't wash himself. He washes his apostles as a way of saying that they're going to share in his high priesthood. Of course, he's the high priest, but they're going to share in his priesthood. So it's absolutely, we could say it's almost as if it's an ordination service, what's going on at the foot washing, which would make sense that only the men's feet were washed. What's also another what's the word I'm looking for? Another clue that it's the establishment of the New Testament priesthood is the Levitical priests are told by Yahweh that only they, the Levitical priests, have a share in the Lord's portion. They share the Lord's portion.
Yes, and they weren't given land.
Or another way that you can translate that is that they share in the Lord's part. What does Jesus say to Peter? Unless you let me wash you, you have no part in me. That too only belonged to the Levitical priests to have a part in Yahweh. And now Jesus is saying to the apostles, unless you let me do this, you have no part in me. Again, a parallel to the priesthood itself.
Yes, and I think if I'm right on this too, the Levites, that tribe did not get land. They had the promised land was segmented off to the tribes.
Yeah, their only portion was Yahweh
was
himself.
The Lord. Yeah. So I think that's a lovely distinction there. That's to be that, and they're consecrated. They're set aside for the Lord alone, which of course has the foundation to point to celibacy in the priesthood later. On certainly the foot washing has a deeper meaning that's been maybe lost.
It's clearly more than let's just do humble service for each other. It's this, and now I think you can begin to understand why Jesus would say to Peter, I know you realize you don't understand what I'm doing right now, but you're going to later. If it were just a gesture of service, I don't think Jesus would have needed to say, I know you don't understand what I'm doing, but later you will. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It was their consecration as New Testament priests, priests of the New Covenant, to offer sacrifices.
And that is, and you say, well, it is an act of service. In fact, in a deeper way, it's that the priest lives to serve the people, offering sacrifice on behalf of the people. There's a great, one of my favorite definitions of the priesthood is Hebrews 5, 1 through 6. That it talks about how the high priest is weak and has his shortcomings and a sinful man, but he's appointed to offer gifts and sacrifices not just for himself but for the people. But it's a beautiful expression of when people want to understand what's the priesthood about. And it mentions Aaron. It says, and one doesn't take this honor upon himself. He was chosen,
called by God.
Chosen as was Aaron.
Yes.
So Aaron's brought up in that passage in Hebrews 5, 1 through 6. And that's on the back of my ordination card, my prayer card that I handed out was that text.
And it also mentions Melchizedek, the high priest of Genesis.
You're a priest forever.
We don't know where he comes from. He just appears, but he offers sacrifices of bread and wine.
Mm-hmm.
All of this is just really fascinating. So
it is a priesthood evening, Holy Thursday, and you would expect to hear something about the Mass, in the readings in the Gospel, like why don't we have John 6 or Jesus talking about his Bread of Life discourse. But we do get the second reading always is from Paul. I think it's from Corinthians. I think it's 2 Corinthians. But it's about on the night before he died, he took bread. So it's Paul's institution narrative, and as we have the institution narrative in the Matthew, Mark, and Luke, we can hear the Last Supper narrative in those three Gospels. But John doesn't have the institution of the Eucharist in his gospel.
But he does have
the
bread discourse.
He does. Yeah. So it's interesting that on the night of Holy Thursday, you get the foot washing gospel passage from John. And then you get the institution narrative still, but it's in the second reading. It's from Paul. I can look it up right now because I have the little mark there.
From Paul in Paul's epistles?
Yeah.
That would be 1 Corinthians chapter 11.
Yeah, that's right. Yep. 1 Corinthians and verses 23 through 26.
Yep. Yeah, that's his institution narrative. So before we go, give everybody a quick preview of what's ahead tomorrow night. What time? 6?
Tomorrow evening, 6 p.m. is Holy Thursday. It's it's the Mass of the Lord's Supper, and there's different texts in the prayers that, again, we're reenacting. So, we say words about this night. He took bread and said the blessing. So there's an emphasis on this night of Passover today. And then at the end of the Mass, you don't really give there's no final blessing, so it really isn't even, quote, over, as we take the Blessed Sacrament. After Holy Communion, the priest carries the Blessed Sacrament in a ciborium solemnly in procession out of the church. And so it's basically, yes, guess what? Jesus is leaving. They got up from the Last Supper. They went to the Mount of Olives to pray. We take Jesus to an altar of repose, which will be in the parish center, which will be decorated with kneelers and a little tabernacle, and you pray at night with Jesus until midnight, and then I come and take the Blessed Sacrament away for good. There's no more prayer in the church. And then at that point, we say the parish church, the tabernacle is empty. Jesus is gone. He's been taken away. Jesus comes and, Judas comes, they take him away. So Holy Thursday night is always unsettling spiritually because the priest is literally doing what Judas did. He's got to take Jesus out of the church and away from the people. And, there's not to be any all-night prayer or all-night adoration from the Blessed Sacrament because Good Friday he dies. And so when you come into church on Good Friday, the altar is bare. There's no ornamentation anywhere. The tabernacle is empty, and there's no Mass, really. I mean, there's no Mass on Good Friday. You can't have Mass on Good Friday. There's no text for it. It's basically, the great prayers of intercession, the veneration of the cross, and then there's Holy Communion for the faithful. So the priest said we have to consecrate enough of the consecrated host for Good Friday on Holy Thursday.
Right. And
so that's preserved in a special location, not in the main church, for communion on Good Friday. But there's no Mass on Good Friday. And then it comes to full culmination in the Easter Vigil, which then concludes what we know as the Triduum, Holy Thursday, Good Friday, and the Easter Vigil. So there's a lot of great rituals that I've told people, if you don't ever come to the Triduum, you will never, ever see these rituals in the Catholic Church, only on these days.
Yeah. Wonderful. And I'm looking forward to the Easter feast and really just walking through these next few days together with you and the people here at St. Michael. Thank you, Father, for your time. For those of you who would have questions you would like for us to address, you can reach me at my email address, which you can find on our church website, which is stmccg.org. Thanks, everyone, for listening. God bless you, and may you have a blessed Holy Week. Oh, sorry, everyone. I wanted to make sure you knew this, that we're hoping to offer this podcast weekly, but for the next couple of weeks, we won't be able to do that because next week we will we'll be observing the Easter feast. Father Rossi will have some great downtime, but we will be back, and we're going to explore really what does Easter mean from the theological, historical context. So thanks for everyone for watching. We'll see you in 2 weeks.